If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. Today I'm going to be sharing a conversation that I had last month with a wonderful woman named Laurette, who ended her nearly 35-year struggle with an eating disorder with the help of the Brain Over Binge approach and course, as well as nutritional support and one-on-one coaching. She also went on to overcome issues related to past trauma and abuse and PTSD. And in this conversation, Laurette shares how she used skills from neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, to address harmful beliefs and strong emotions. If you're a regular listener of this podcast, you know that my goal is to help you stop the binge eating habit, to help you get free of the urges and just move on with your life. This is where I feel like I can offer the most value to you by staying focused on helping you stop the destructive behavior in the most efficient way possible, and by helping you see that you do not need to sort out the rest of your life and all of your problems and emotions in order to do that. However, I know that stopping binge eating is not the end of the road for your journey to living the life that you want. It certainly can bring you back to feeling normal and excited to move on from all of that pain. Or you may discover that there's a different kind of pain after the binging stops, which is what Laurette experienced and what some others have experienced as well. I don't want you to feel like something's wrong with you if you don't feel amazing after you stop binge eating. It can take a while for you to get used to living a binge-free life, or to learn to deal with things that you may have been ignoring when you were caught up in the constant struggle with the eating disorder. You're definitely not alone if this is your experience. Someone recently emailed me to say that my approach gave her the answer to binging and purging, but it did not give her the answer to what she said was an absolutely overwhelming mountain of stuff that started to surface when I stopped binging. She said that her binging and purging was a known discomfort, but that the emotions that started to surface when she stopped binging was not something she was prepared to deal with. I don't want that experience of life after binging to send anyone back into binging, because it's just not the solution. So I hope this episode gives you a way to work through that if you can relate to this experience. When Laurette and I were talking before the show, she shared something that I hope will help integrate what this episode addresses with the approach that I share on this podcast as a whole. She said that on the surface, it may seem like learning to listen to and resolve emotional messages is at odds with simply dismissing messages as junk from the lower brain. But she went on to say that she thinks it's actually in perfect harmony. The difference lies in an action as opposed to a belief. When the message or voice from your brain gives you a harmful action to perform, for example, to binge, to purge, or to restrict, you simply dismiss it. When the voice or the message from your brain says something about you or your identity or your worth or value, that is the voice that she helps women listen to and understand and change. I hope that what Laurette shares will fill a gap in what I teach, or just give you a different angle from which to look at your issues, or simply provide some additional tools that you can use to improve your life. I also want to let you know that Laurette shares some details about her extreme dieting and purging behaviors, as well as some traumatic experiences that she went through. So if you feel like hearing that at this point in your recovery would be too difficult, you can come back to this episode at another time. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you benefit from this conversation. Today, I'm glad to welcome another guest to the show. Her name is Laurette Smith. Laurette has been a women's coach for 20 years. She's a certified NLP practitioner, that's neuro-linguistic programming, and in her work, she combines intuition with scientifically backed principles. Her passion for helping others grew out of her own experience with childhood abuse, bulimia, as well as PTSD. She developed tools to change the messages she was playing in her head, and now her work primarily focuses on helping women get their emotional and their rational brain to work with each other to create real and lasting change. And with that, I want to welcome Laurette to the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me here, Catherine. I feel so blessed to be on your show. I'm basically in love with you, to be honest.
Well, I'm so glad for you to be here. Really, really thankful that you came on the show. And I want to give the listeners a little bit of a backstory about how we got connected, because I think it's important to what we're going to talk about today. You had used the Brain Over Binge course back in December of 2019, and although it helped you get the bulimia under control, there were some things that came up for you as you stopped those destructive behaviors that you told me about regarding your thoughts and your emotions that you had to deal with. You told me that getting the bulimia under control did not help you feel better about yourself. And to change this, you basically went on a journey to turn around the messages in your head that were keeping you stuck and feeling badly about yourself. And that was really a key to continuing down the path of recovery and solidifying your new habits and not falling back into the eating disorder. And I thought this was really interesting, and I know many others may share your experience. So I wanted to bring you on to talk about your story. It's really going to inspire people to see that change is possible. I think it would be good just to start by sharing your own story about your struggle with bulimia, how the Brain Over Binge course helped you, as well as working with a coach at Binge Code who I recommend for one-on-one coaching. And I'd also love for you to share some of your professional background as well.
Sure. So everything changed for me actually last November. So it's just over a year ago now. But to give you a bit of a summary of my life, so I'm 52 years old, and my eating disorder started when I was 17, 18 years old. I was always a little person, but my brother said to me one day, he said, you need to lose weight, and basically you need to be as skinny as possible. Otherwise, people will reject you and they will laugh at you behind your back. So he said, here's the plan. Stop eating and just lose as much weight as you possibly can. He said, and if you get too skinny, just eat a little bit and put a little bit of weight on. And so I basically just stopped eating. I worshipped my brother and kind of took his words to the bank. And that, became a 35-year journey into an eating disorder. I have been on almost every single diet known to man. When I had children and I was running around with my kids, I found it harder to diet because, I needed a lot more energy. I've got 4 children, and I was homeschooling them as well. So my life was really, really busy. So I discovered over-exercising combined with a self-beach diet. And that's what really started plunging me into the world of bulimia. Because once you start, counting calories and then trying to expend them afterwards, you get into this whole cycle of being scared about what you eat. And I became absolutely petrified about what I eat. And the worst case I had was one time when I didn't eat for 3 weeks. And my husband I couldn't even drive. I was almost passing out, and my husband was begging me to eat. And I just couldn't. I just became so scared of food. And he ended up driving me to the urgent care. And I was borderline diabetic. My blood sugar was all the way down to 60. And the doctor said to me, you have to go home and have something to eat immediately. So I did come home, and I ate that night and threw it up. I had gotten to the stage where I couldn't exercise anymore. I was in my 40s now. I was worn out. My body was getting sore. I ended up hurting my knee. I hurt my shoulder. And so I couldn't over-exercise to purge the calories. And so that's when I really started purging in earnest. And I combined that with intermittent fasting, and I thought I was being healthy. Of course, I wasn't intermittent fasting at all. I was intermittent eating. And so I was eating on the weekends, and I would purge all weekend. And then to punish myself for binging and purging, I wouldn't eat from Sunday night, and then I wouldn't eat until the Wednesday. And I had ballet on a Tuesday morning, so I would have some salt before ballet, and my body started breaking down. I stopped digesting food. I was exhausted all the time. My hair started falling out, and I knew I needed help. I woke up one morning feeling absolutely desperate and ended up connecting with this person on Facebook who told me about you. And I started listening to the Brain Over Binge. I started binging your podcast that day. And it was like a bit like an angel actually reaching out to me and offering me a lifeline of a way that I had never thought about my binging and purging habits. And then fast forward, when I was in New Zealand, and My son was down there, living there, and we were going to a private beach for the day. And my brother was there. This is the one who told me to be skinny. I was standing in the bedroom getting ready for the day, and I had this beautiful bright red bathing suit, and I was so excited to go swimming with my 24-year-old, because of course living in America, I didn't get to go swimming, and he's living in New Zealand, my home country, and it was like a lifelong dream come true. So I looked at my bathing suit and I looked at my body, and I'm like, I can't do it. And so I left my bathing suit in the suitcase, and I had bought a baggy pair of shorts just in case I wimped out. And I took the shorts instead. And so we hiked to this beach, and we all went to get changed to go swimming, New Zealand style changing rooms, which basically means you wrap a towel around you. And I looked at my bag and I said, oh my gosh, I forgot my togs. I literally lied to my own kid to cover up how ashamed I felt. And I put my shorts on and my tank top, and I scurried into the water when nobody was looking. And then I wouldn't even really swim because I was worried about my hair getting ruined and what would my brother think of me if I looked ugly for the rest of the day. And so I robbed myself of being able to have this lifelong dream come true with my son because I was worried about what my brother thought of me. And later that night, I'm standing back in my bedroom looking at my bathing suit, and I just knew I have to change. Something has to change for me. And that's when I got online and I purchased your course, and I'm like, I'm doing it. I don't care what I have to change when I get home. I'm doing it because I was 51 at that stage. I can't live like this anymore. This is ridiculous that I'm still scared of my brother. I've been scared of him for so many years of his opinion, and I knew things had to change. So that's how I found you.
Wow. I'm so glad you did, because gosh, no one wants to live with that pain. Just hearing your story, I know a lot of people can relate, just being in this place where you feel so out of control, you don't know what to do, you feel so lost. And, just to make that decision, like, okay, I'm going to change. This is my time to turn things around. It's not for anyone else. It's for me. So that's really great, and maybe you could just talk about some of like how you were able to get past this. Because it seems like you really had very erratic eating habits where you weren't even eating at all. So what was it like to, make those changes? And I know that going through the course, you ended up needing some additional one-on-one coaching, and, just talk about that experience, how it was to turn things around and start feeding your body and letting go of these habits.
It was torture in a word. I'm really glad I did it. But it was not easy because my body had actually lost the ability to digest food. And my hunger and fullness cycles were completely switched. So, people say, look, it's easy. If you're hungry, then eat. And when you get full, stop eating. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that advice is useless for somebody like me. And so my coach had me start eating on a schedule. And it took me 3 weeks to have 1 day of scheduled eating. Really glad I did it, but it was not easy. I actually used to get in the bath, Catherine, and listen to your Q&As. your Q&A sessions for the course, which are just like a gold mine. And I would just have it going over in my brain, especially the thing about, what is it you would say? If you think that you can restrict and not end up binging, if you think you're an exception, let me tell you right now, you're not an exception. That particular little snippet just went over and over and over in my brain. Like, I can't restrict. I knew that I didn't want to go back, knew I had to go forward. So it was very difficult. And I made like lists of safe foods, and then medium scary foods, and then really truly terrifying foods, of which apple crumble, which is a New Zealand dish, it's kind of like apple pie. It's the sort of thing that I could never just have like one serving of. Like, I'd eat the whole plate. And so that was like my scariest food imaginable. So what I did was I would only choose off my safe list. And I did that for like a month. So I had quinoa was my number one safe food, because even though it was a carb, which I was really scared of, it made me think about health and that I was really taking care of myself. And so quinoa was my number one safe food. So I went to quinoa all the time when I was feeling kind of freaked out. And then after about a month, I started introducing medium scary foods, but I did them in a way that, like, the first time I had a piece of pizza, my husband and I were out at a restaurant, because this was before COVID, before the restaurants shut down. And so I had a pizza at a restaurant, and I chose a pizza with had pear and brie on it. So I chose vegetarian. No, I'm not a vegetarian, but I chose something that to me was really a real healthy option. So I felt safe eating it, and I had a glass of wine, and the glass of wine I chose was a really expensive one because I knew I would only get one. And so I wouldn't be tempted to have another one. And that's how I started easing into my medium scary foods. I didn't delve into scary foods until probably 6 months into recovery. I just felt like I needed a bit more of that buffer. The first time I had a burger and fries, actually my husband and I went to Red Robin, and I had just a tavern burger, so it wasn't even a big one. But I hadn't had a burger with a bun for so many years. And if I had had a bun, I'd purged afterwards. And so we were on the way home, and just this blinding panic hit me, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just ate a burger. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I had some fries with it. And just hot boiling panic all over my body. And my husband was trying to have a conversation with me, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, you so need to shut up. And because I was just in panic mode. And we got home, and I found that the urges to purge were stronger than the urges to binge. So I was desperate to purge. And so I asked my 22-year-old if they wanted to get in the hot tub with me, because I knew if I was in the hot tub in the backyard around a member of my family, especially one of my kids, I wouldn't be able to throw up, right? I'm in the hot tub. And so we got in the hot tub, and I stayed there for 2 hours until the urge to purge left me. That's how long it took. And then I tried a burger about 3 or 4 weeks after that, and same reaction, except it was worse, actually. I got in the bath, and I lit a candle, and I opened the window, and I put some music on, and I read a book, and I just overwhelmed my senses to drown out that urge to purge, and it lasted about 3 hours. And ever since then, that was the last true panic I had over eating anything, and that would have been about 6 months ago. And since then, I haven't been scared of food. Oh my gosh, Catherine, I started eating sandwiches. My coach told me, eat a sandwich, and I'm like, woman, are you mad? She said, seriously, you can eat a sandwich. And so I never thought I'd ever be able to eat sandwiches again. And now I eat a sandwich and I don't throw it up. Sandwiches are amazing.
They are amazing. And you are amazing for going through this process. I just think it's super helpful for everyone to hear this, that your journey to learning to eat normally took some courage, a lot of courage, and sometimes that you just really had to get through. You eat a burger, and the problem, which I'm sure you can see, is not the burger, it's your thoughts. It's that reaction that your brain has because of how it's been trained that, oh, I can't ever eat a burger. And just being able to ride that out and being able to know that it's going to pass, and then having that reaction go away. And, other people have had that experience as well. It's just really great to hear that. And just the way you retrain your body, you allowed it to heal. You were able to kind of regulate your hunger signals. I think it's good that you shared how they were so off at first. It's good that people can hear that the hunger and fullness can take a while to re-regulate, and you may need support in that area. And you helped yourself, and you got that support, and you got that sort of nutritional help and more guidance there. So I think that's really great.
I was going to say, I was also seeing a nutritionist, which was really helpful too, because I was actually getting my body tested. And my nails started to grow. My hairdresser noticed that my hair actually started to recover. So my body healed.
And that's something I say a lot in the course and on this podcast too. If you need support in that area, getting a course or a book is not going to give you that individual nutritional guidance that you need to kind of heal your body. So, seeking additional help in that area is really important. I would love to talk about your experience. You said after you had gotten these habits under control, you had helped yourself re-regulate, you stopped the binging and purging, then all these other things kind of came up for you. You realized there was more you needed to deal with, in that, you had been so consumed by these habits for so long that there was this flood of emotions or thoughts, and you just still didn't feel good, and you had to address that. And kind of before we get into that, I want to talk about, those of you who are regular listeners know that I really try to drive the point home that you can stop binging, you can stop purging, you can change your habits, even if you don't feel good. I think it's important not to think you have to feel good to stop these habits, but it doesn't mean that if you feel bad, you should just ignore that and not work on it. Like certainly if you feel bad, you should work on it. And that's why I think your story is important. So can you talk about your experience of like ending this habit and then realizing that there was more work to do?
Oh, totally. So one of the keys, I think, to the Brain Over the Binge course, which really helped me, was seeing those messages as junk from your lower brain, right? It's just my limbic system, my lower brain telling me that this is what I need to do to survive. Getting rid of those messages was unbelievably helpful for me. However, what I ended up transitioning to was more emotional eating, because for me, I still had some deep-rooted issues that I wasn't really facing. I know you mentioned in the introduction that, I have a history of abuse. I was raped for years as a child, and my brother started calling me fatness explosion when I was 7 years old. This is the same brother that told me as a teenager that I needed to lose weight. So I came to realize, though, that those messages were about him, not about me. And I think that's one of the important distinctions to make, is because when we get told these things as a kid or as a teenager, we end up internalizing the voice, where for me, it was not my brother's voice anymore. It was my voice. And my voice is a lot more powerful in my life than my brother's. And so I would stand in front of the mirror and I would call myself fat and I would call myself ugly, no matter what shape I was in, because that is the only way that I knew to relate to myself. And so once the binging and the purging urges were gone, I was kind of left with a little bit of this void. Like, how do I deal with this stuff now? I'm not used to dealing with my emotions. And that's when I started using actually neuro-linguistic skills on myself, because, we have two brains, right? We have our thinking brain and we have our emotional brain. And the emotional brain doesn't actually speak in language. It will shoot out words for our thinking brain to grasp onto, to give logic and reason for our actions, but it's not how the emotional brain hears information. The emotional brain speaks in sights, in sounds, and in sensations. And so if you want to actually change the program that you're running in your emotional brain, that's how you work with it, so that it can stop screaming at your thinking brain to act in certain ways, to feel certain ways about yourself. When women look in the mirror and they tell themselves, I'm never going to be good enough, I'm ugly, people just don't like me. And when I turned around and embraced those voices and learned how to communicate back with them in a way that changed them, it's like the whole program in my brain changed. And that's when I was able to see that my brother was just speaking out of his paradigm. It had nothing to do with me at all. And it was like I was able to go into my brain and turn that record off. Because it's like when you have a broken record in your brain or anywhere, and it just goes on and on until you turn it off, right? And so I was able to actually go in and just simply turn off that voice. So I stopped calling myself fatness explosion. I stopped attacking myself for being fat and ugly. And then I was able to start putting in new beliefs in place. Is that making sense?
Yeah, it is. Like, I guess what's coming up for me is that anyone can use these tools and dismiss their urges and stop binging and stop these behaviors. But if you feel like you're ultimately like not worthy, if you feel like you're fat and ugly and terrible, then what motivation are you really going to have to pursue a better life? You may not even feel motivated to dismiss the urges when you have these automatic thoughts that say you need to restrict, you need to not eat because you're terrible and you're fat. If you truly believe that, then you'll be tempted to go back into restriction, to stop eating again. Does that kind of resonate with you of your experience?
100% accurate. Yes, absolutely.
I think what's really important in your story is that, you spent all this time restricting and binging and purging, and kind of when your real life problems came back, and not that the binging solved them, but it basically can be a distraction. It can be a side effect of being caught up in these destructive eating habits, is that you're so caught up in thinking about that and what you're going to eat and, you're binging and you're purging and the effects, that you tend not to think so much about your regular life. And I remember my own experience when I stopped the behaviors, then it did feel different, like to think about other problems and not just whether or not I was going to binge that day. So there was a process for me kind of to learn to live a normal life again. And I think I was just so excited to put the binging behind me that I don't necessarily remember that period very well. It was just more of an excitement like, wow, I can have problems and still not binge. I can be really upset and still not binge. I was more excited about the problems I was facing because it wasn't leading to binging. That doesn't mean that I never went back to work on any of those things. So I want to talk about your experience in that because I know yours was a little different than mine. What I find really inspiring about your story is that you did have a lot of strong emotions come up after you stopped the binging, but you never said, okay, that means I should go back to the habit. Like just because life is painful, I never want to turn back. But then what? You can't just live in a state where you're feeling all these powerful feelings and not do anything. So I think it's great that you found another way instead of saying, oh, I'm just going to go back to the habit. So maybe you can talk about that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good point. And I do feel like I'm walking proof that you don't have to resolve your emotions in order to stop binging and purging, because my emotions were all over the place, terrible. And yet I stopped binging and purging, and all the urges eventually left me and I became a normal eater. But of course, I still had issues in my life that I needed to work on and to resolve. And so that's when I started working through kind of the 6-step process that I designed. This is what I take my clients through to help me get a grip on my emotions. I really wanted to be a whole person, and I was finding that I was isolating myself from my family because, yeah, you're right. I'm not obsessed with food all the time and what I'm eating. So now I've got all this vacant space in my brain and everything kind of came bounding a little bit and asking for attention. So should I talk about kind of the 6-step process?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So, when I was saying before that, our emotional brain speaks in sights, sounds, and sensations. And so what I did and what I do with my clients is I help them to identify kind of the predominant emotion that they are dealing with. For a lot of women, it's sadness. And then I have them, so that's step 1, finding the emotion. Step 2 is go and find a photo. So go and find a photo that shows what that looks like for you. And it's amazing to me how different the photos can be when it's the same emotion, because, sometimes you'll look at a picture of a beach and you'll be like, oh my gosh, I can see myself there. This is amazing. You look at a picture of a different beach and it just doesn't do anything for you. And so it's incredible to see the photos that women come up with. I have an 100-page journal of this journey of photos that I used, because then when you have an image, you have a photo. This is in neuro-linguistics. This is called memory reconsolidation. You're actually able to unstick the memory where that emotion originated in your life. And so for me, a lot of the depression I was feeling, of course, came from my grandfather and from my brother. And so you can ask, well, what belief was created in that moment? So I want to use the example of my grandfather here. Like most or all abuse victims, we blame ourselves, right? That's really common, is to blame yourself. And a lot of the destructive habits I had in my life were to punish myself because I felt like I was to blame for what happened. And I had been told for so many years, you're not to blame. And I'm like, well, duh, of course I'm not to blame. I was 7 years old. I knew I wasn't to blame. And yet somehow I still believed that I was to blame. So when I found this image, this photo of how I was feeling, and I'm like, well, what do you believe about yourself? Well, I believe that I'm to blame. So the 4th step is that you ask one question, like, how has that belief been helpful? And so I literally sat on the floor in my bedroom and had a discussion with my emotion and just said, how has that belief been helpful? And what my emotion, my emotional brain, your limbic system where your memories are stored, what my brain showed me was that at 7 years old, I was just a really, really kind person. And I used to even pray for sick people when I was 7. I was actually kind of weird, but very sweet, obviously. And I went into my grandfather's room because I knew he was upset and I wanted to be kind to him. And, that was the first day that he raped me. And so my life kind of fell apart. And he also told me it was my mother's idea. I didn't find out till I was 31 that that was a lie, but I believed that whole time. And so I needed a way for my life to make sense so that I could stay sane. And so the way that my brain made sense of it was to say, it's my fault. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. If it's my fault, if I did something to have this happen to me, I don't like it, but that makes sense to me. And so I'm sitting on my bedroom floor and I get this realization, this memory comes up from my emotional brain. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's why I blamed myself. And then I was able to, the fifth one, which is the one need, what do I need now? What does that original part of me need? It's like, do I still need to blame myself in order to make sense of my world? And I realized, no, I don't. I don't need that anymore. And so the whole concept of blaming myself just left me. Like I just didn't blame myself anymore for what happened with my grandfather. I understood that it was about him and not about me. And then I was able to go through, this is the sixth step, and change the pattern in my brain one sense at a time, which simply means giving it a different image, taking your brain on an image journey. And I just use Google Images. And it's easier to do this, of course, with an actual neuro-linguistics practitioner, but you can do it for yourself as well, is taking your brain through an image journey of where you were, where you are now, where you want to go in the future, because that is the language that the emotional brain speaks. When you start in any recovery journey, you want to get an image of what it's going to be like at the end. So for me, when I started the Brain Over the Binge course, I got an image of who I wanted to be, right? I wanted to be a normal eater, and I could see myself recovered because I showed that to my brain. I could see myself recovered, and that's what kept me going, even times, oh my gosh, Catherine, when I wanted to quit because it was not an easy journey. I kept marching toward that because I had an image of what it was going to look like in the future. And so that's kind of the 6-step method that I take a woman through, and emotions will come up and ask for resolution. And for me, the way I was dealing it, given I wasn't binging and purging anymore, I was isolating from my family, and I was able to completely stop that behavior because I started dealing with the emotion that was driving it. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. And I like how your process of kind of dealing with emotions or belief systems that you're holding that are not serving you, it doesn't have to be this big, long drawn out process. Like you have an insight about it and suddenly things are different. And I find that really inspiring.
It can change so fast. And I know it's really popular in culture to talk about limiting beliefs. I actually don't believe in limiting beliefs. I think all beliefs we have are helpful. It's just that some of them need to be updated because they were created at a time when we needed them. And we just need to sit down and ask ourselves, how is it helping me? And this is what I love about neuro-linguistics and getting your emotional and your thinking brains to work together. Because when they work together, you can actually make really, really rapid changes in your life. Like somebody might push somebody away because they really want to be close and connected to them. And when you step through that process and they see it for themselves, and I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, I want to be really connected with my husband. And so I push him away. Like, how does that even work? But something has happened in our life to show us that that's unsafe, and that this is the program that we have going in our brain. And neurolinguistics is amazing to me. Like the quickness with which people can have incredible changes is amazing. And that's what I love about adding this on after a recovery journey, because some people, they end binging and purging and they're fantastic. They don't need anything else, right? And then there's some people like me who just, were still lost.
It's what you said about something not being what you want, but you do it anyway because it's helping you in some way. I actually had this thought about binging in that way. I think it was a huge insight for me that people kept telling me all along, it's helping you in some way. It's helping you in some way. It's coping. It's helping you cope, whatever. And I had this big insight that I was binging to cope with the urges to binge. And what I really wanted was to be free of these urges. And these urges came up and they plagued me and they were habitual and automatic and really intrusive. And I truly wanted to be free of them. But the only way I knew how to be free of them was to eat massive amounts of food. And it just perpetuated the cycle and this huge insight of like, okay, that's why I'm doing this. That's how it's helping me. And then, I went on a journey of exploring why the urges were there and all that. But I don't know. I just wanted to add that because it just kind of came to me as you were talking.
Yeah, no, that's 100% the point. Yeah. It's like I used to have a shadow following me around the whole time and understand I had really severe PTSD, but it was to the point where like if I left something on the kitchen counter, I wouldn't turn around and pick it up. I would walk in a little circle because I was so scared of this shadow. And so one day I just decided I have to turn around and walk into the shadow and see what's there, because I knew I wanted to resolve it. And I was resolving it by running away from it. And when I turned around and walked into it, I realized, it's just an emotion. An emotion is just energy. And when you learn how to deal with your emotions and how to speak to your emotions and how to keep them moving, they stop having power over you, which is very similar to what you did and to what you teach about how you don't want the urge to binge. And so you eat to get rid of it instead of dealing with it in an entirely different way, which actually has success. And that was, it was the only thing. It was the only thing that got rid of my my urges to binge and my urges to purge. Was I would actually see my brain as like a computer program with all this junk floating up from it, firing off from it, and I'd be like, I could hear your voice in my head. And I'd just be like, yep, it's just junk from my lower brain. It's just junk from my lower brain. It's okay that it's here because I don't have to follow it.
Yeah, it's kind of like turning around and facing that shadow like that. Once you see what it is, not as scary. It's not as compelling because you realize that it is just junk. It's something that you can get through and be free of it. So many people who have eating disorders do have a history of trauma, and we can, could get into like all the reasons that could possibly be the case. But I think a lot of it kind of boils down to if you are someone who has low self-esteem, who has, those issues from the trauma, you are going to be more likely to go down the path of dieting. And that leads to a whole cycle of problems. Their survival instincts kick in, you start binging, so I think a lot of it is more like correlation than trauma directly causes binging. I never want people to get the impression listening to my podcast or reading my books that like I don't think dealing with trauma or emotions is important. Sure, it is very important to live a full life. I just think when you make dealing with these issues required to stop the habit, then I think it can perpetuate the habit because it's hard to deal with these issues when you are binging and when you're consumed with these urges. When you're having these urges, you can't even think about anything else. Like dealing with trauma, I couldn't even get myself to go for a walk when I had these urges. So I think the fact that you were able to put the binging behind you, deal with the issues with the trauma is really, really important and inspiring. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree. I don't think for everybody it's in that order, but it certainly was for me. I don't think I would have been able to deal with the emotions without first learning how to dismiss those urges and teaching my body how to actually start being healthy again. And yeah, getting rid of that major part of my life is what freed me up to even have the emotional energy and wherewithal to start, dealing with what was actually underneath.
Some people may be able to deal with the issues at the same time, and there's definitely nothing wrong with that. It's just when you are so consumed with these urges to binge, there's got to be a tool to help you get through that. And that's what I hope my work can provide someone who is going down the path of dealing with the trauma as a way to help themselves overcome this. Like there still needs to be something to help them get through the urges. So, if that's the one piece that this work that I do gives them, then that's great. I do think that my work is a little more suited toward people who don't have this major trauma in their background. I mean, everyone has problems. Like I definitely had issues growing up and tendencies toward anxiety, depression, like things like that for sure. But I did not have those major traumatic events, which is why I think what you're saying definitely fills a gap in what I teach.
Absolutely, yeah. And I totally hear what you're saying and I totally agree. And at the same time, the help that you gave me, Catherine, is just like, I'd been searching for years. I had been searching for years to find some way to conquer my eating disorder. Bulimia was out of control in my life. as I said at the beginning, you were like an angel coming in and showing me exactly what I could do. Like even my years of coaching, I had not been able to conquer this. And it was using the brain over binge approach that helped me get that area of my life just completely changed.
No, that's amazing. I'm so glad I could be.
I'm very grateful.
Good. I'm so glad I could be part of your journey. And I think that we've talked a lot about like my story and your story. And I think maybe we could end by helping to give the listeners something they can work with and they can use in their own life. So I kind of have two final questions. The first one is, what belief systems do you feel like are important that you see people struggle with who have food issues that people need to overcome basically to assist themselves in letting go of this for good? Like I talked about earlier, if you have certain belief systems, if you always think you're terrible and you're fat and you have to restrict, it's going to be really hard to let go of this completely. So kind of what belief systems do you see are helpful for people to let go of as they're moving toward freedom?
I think one of the main ones is just feeling hopeless. Like, this is me. I'm trapped. I'm never going to get out. This is just who I am. I think that's one of the main ones because it attacks your very identity, and it feeds into all those beliefs of, I'm not good enough. I'm not valuable. People don't like me. I'm ashamed of myself. In fact, shame is obviously one of the most prevalent for sure. And then just, I can't cope. I can't cope without binging and purging. It was one of my major beliefs. I literally didn't believe I could cope with life without it. And I found that I can, of course. But that hopelessness is kind of the main one where people just think, yeah, well, like everybody yo-yo diets. Everybody does this. It's like, no, not everybody does. You can actually change your habits. Then you can change your belief about yourself. You can see yourself as beautiful, as valuable, and as, worthy of having friends, worthy of receiving love, worthy of loving yourself, and not carry around like the sack of sadness with you all the time. And I think that's one of the main things I got from your course was the power of being able to choose my reaction. Just because my brain says something doesn't mean I have to do it. And just because somebody says something about me, it doesn't make it true. I get to decide what I believe about myself because your beliefs drive your feelings drive your actions, and your actions drive your results. So if you want a different result, change your beliefs. And it's not that hard to do.
Yeah, for sure. And I like how you use some of the lessons you learned in stopping binging to kind of apply to just learning to kind of stand up as a woman, as a person, to make your own choices and not feel driven by your automatic programming, whether that's related to binging or any eating habits or destructive behaviors in your life. So just as a final question, what are just, someone who may be feeling completely overwhelmed right now and feeling like they don't know where to start, they don't know, how to make progress in moving forward. What are some small steps someone could take to make progress? And then also, can you share with the listeners how they can learn more about you?
So I would say the first thing to do is, when you're going to bed tonight, and look in the mirror and just ask yourself, what do I believe about myself? Have a piece of paper with you and just write down what you truly believe, nobody else looking. You don't have to share it with anybody. And then ask yourself how that's helping you, and start to get used to just having, I call them cups of tea, have a little chat. Like when I have a feeling that comes in that feels uncomfortable, and I've learned to deal with uncomfortable feelings, like if I'm feeling angry or sad about something, I'll say, oh, hello, sadness. You can come and sit down, tell me all about it, because it's simply a part of you trying to speak to you about something. And so a small step you can take is just to start to write down how you feel about yourself and what you believe and how that is helping you. Because it starts to open up that channel in your brain, and then go and find a photo on Google about that shows you how that feels, and then find a photo of what you want to believe and just start showing that to your brain. Start thinking about it. And then another step you can take is like Catherine, just like you teach about hearing those urges and seeing them as, junk and dismissing them. It's the same thing as those voices that are over and over in your head write down what those voices are. For me, I was fat and ugly. And then you can just go and turn that record player off. It's like sweeping your kitchen. When you see junk on the floor, just sweep it up, throw it away. You don't need to keep that anymore. So I would say those are two, they're actually huge steps, but they're pretty simple. They're simple to do, but they can have a huge impact in your life. Does that kind of give you the answer that you're looking for there?
Yes, for sure. I love the sweeping the floor example. Like, you don't have to make it mean anything. Like, it doesn't necessarily matter how it got there. It's just there, sweep it up, move on.
Yeah, I mean, it's your brain. You get to decide what record is playing. If you don't like the record that's playing in your brain, change it. It's not always easy to do. It's a very simple concept. And sometimes there's, obviously some habits. Like, for example, when I was recovering from bulimia and I was dismissing the urges, at the same time, I was creating habits in my life to support that because I was scheduled eating and I was forcing myself to eat even when I felt sick. And I had, supportive things in place for when the urges came to purge and my whole body was just like on fire and panic. I had things that I would do to support me through that so that I wouldn't go there. Because it's one thing for your brain to tell you, it's another thing when your whole body has gotten in on the action and you literally feel nauseous and like you're going to vomit. So I had support things in place for that as well. So, you change your beliefs, you change the way you're thinking, and you start different habits at the same time. But the habits become more ingrained because you've done the work of changing your beliefs.
Yeah, it's like you're setting yourself up for success.
Yeah.
How can people find you and learn more about what you do?
Well, there's two ways. So my website is laurettesmith.com. So people can find me on my website. But I also run a Facebook group, free Facebook group, where I coach actually each week for free. And that's called Emotional Freedom. So you can just go on Facebook and type in Emotional Freedom, or you can access it from my website. I'm constantly staggered at how, when somebody commits to change, how fast things can actually happen for them. It's beautiful.
It is, definitely.
Catherine, I also have a one-sheet PDF that goes through the 6-step method that I take myself through, I take women through, and I'd love to be able to offer that to your listeners if that would be a good thing for them to have.
Yeah, definitely. I think the listeners will benefit from that. I will link to that in the show description. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your story and being vulnerable and just really putting, your experience out there to benefit others. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're so welcome, Catherine. You're so wonderful. I so appreciate you. Oh my gosh. I used to go out to a cafe and take my Brain Over Binge book and just sit there and read and take notes. And I really digested the information and got it into my brain so that I had it to call on. So I'm so grateful for you. And I'm so grateful for this podcast. It was life-changing for me.
That's amazing to hear. It really means a lot when I, get to talk to the people who my work is helping. So thank you so much. I just really enjoyed talking to you today.
Thanks, Catherine.
If you're new to this podcast and the Brain Over Binge approach, you can get my free ebook, The Brain Over Binge Basics, in the show description, which will get you started in learning how to dismiss the urges to binge. In the show description, you can also learn more about my course, which Laurette mentioned in this episode. You can also go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe to check that out and to learn about the new option to use the course for as little time or as much time as you need for only $10.99 per month. I hope this conversation has inspired you and that it will help you make 2021 a binge-free year. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you'll join me again next time. I want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the hosts of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.